Welcome back to our channel, where we bring you the most exclusive and deeply analyzed updates from the world of daytime drama. Today is a truly breathtaking day to delve into the lives of our favorite Los Angeles families, though the skies over the Forrester mansion have suddenly turned incredibly dark. Let us step right into the heart-wrenching drama that is about to unfold. For weeks, the singular, all-consuming obsession gripping the elite circles of Los Angeles has been the vicious, unyielding corporate warfare between the legacy empire of Forrester Creations and the newly minted, aggressively ambitious Logan Creations. The fashion world has been completely captivated by the scandalous defection of Hope Logan Spencer, the shocking launch of the Hope by Logan brand, and the bitter, deeply personal feuds that have shattered families and destroyed long-standing alliances. The runway was the ultimate battlefield, and the weapons of choice were stolen designs, poached talent, and devastating public relations maneuvers. However, in a single, terrifying heartbeat, the glittering facade of the haute couture world has been violently stripped away. The Forrester family is about to be plunged into a nightmare so profound and terrifying that every single corporate grievance, every stolen diamond, and every bitter rivalry will instantly evaporate into utter insignificance. The catastrophic chain of events traces its origins back to the dimly lit, tension-filled atmosphere of the Bikini Bar, a location that recently served as the stage for a violent clash between the younger generation's most bitter rivals. Will Spencer, drowning in a toxic cocktail of alcohol, guilt, and the crushing weight of his family's corporate secrets, found himself face-to-face with R.J. Forrester. The animosity between the two young men, fueled by their mutual love for Electra Forrester and the escalating war between their respective fathers, finally exploded into physical violence. In a chaotic, adrenaline-fueled brawl, Will's drunken rage culminated in a devastating punch that tragically landed on the face of the intervening patriarch, Eric Forrester. In the immediate aftermath, RJ emerged as the perceived victor, manipulating the narrative to paint Will as an unhinged monster while securing the unwavering loyalty and affection of a horrified Electra. However, the intoxicating rush of RJ's triumph was destined to be horrifyingly short-lived. In the hours following the violent altercation, the adrenaline that had been coursing through RJ's veins began to rapidly dissipate, leaving behind an inexplicable, overwhelming exhaustion that defied all logic. He had walked away from the brawl seemingly unscathed, save for a few minor bruises, yet his body began to betray him in the most terrifying manner imaginable. The vibrant, energetic young designer suddenly found himself struggling to draw a full breath, his skin turning a ghastly, translucent shade of pale. Without any warning, the world around RJ violently tilted on its axis. His vision blurred into a suffocating darkness, his knees buckled beneath him, and he collapsed to the floor in a lifeless heap, sending shockwaves of absolute terror through the Forrester household. The immediate aftermath of RJ's sudden collapse was a blur of frantic, blood-curdling screams and sheer, unadulterated panic. The luxurious, meticulously curated halls of the Forrester mansion were suddenly filled with the piercing, urgent sounds of sirens as paramedics rushed to save the young heir. The frantic ambulance ride through the neon-lit streets of Los Angeles felt like an agonizing eternity for a family that was already buckling under the weight of immense corporate and personal trauma. Upon arriving at the hospital, RJ was immediately whisked away through a pair of swinging doors, disappearing into a maze of sterile hallways and beeping machinery, leaving his terrified family stranded in the cold, unforgiving purgatory of the emergency room waiting area. The suffocating tension in the hospital waiting room was thick enough to cut with a knife. The sterile, clinical environment stood in stark, horrifying contrast to the glamorous, vibrant world of high fashion that Brooke and Ridge Forrester usually inhabited. Stripped of their designer armor and billionaire status, they were reduced to the most primal and vulnerable state of human existence, terrified parents pleading with the universe for the life of their child. The minutes stretched into agonizing hours, every ticking second amplifying the agonizing dread that had settled heavily in the pits of their stomachs. The petty squabbles over fashion lines, media coverage, and corporate betrayals that had consumed their every waking thought just hours prior now felt like distant, foolish memories from another lifetime. When the swinging doors finally opened, the figure that emerged carried a weight that seemed to crush the very air out of the room. Dr. John Finn Finnegan, Steffy's devoted husband and a highly respected physician, walked toward his in-laws with a heavy, measured gait. Finn is a man who is intimately familiar with the delicate balance between life and death, but nothing could have prepared him for the agonizing task of delivering a catastrophic diagnosis to his own family. His usually warm, empathetic eyes were shadowed with a profound, inescapable sorrow. The moment Brooke and Ridge saw the devastating expression etched across Finn's face, the last remaining fragments of their hope shattered into a million irreparable pieces. With a voice trembling with tightly controlled emotion, Finn delivered the earth-shattering news that would permanently alter the trajectory of the Forrester family's lives. After running a battery of exhaustive tests and emergency blood panels, the medical team had uncovered a terrifying reality lurking beneath RJ's sudden collapse. It was not a concussion from the fight, nor was it exhaustion from his demanding design schedule. Finn looked directly into the eyes of his shattered in-laws and spoke the two words that strike primal terror into the heart of every parent: acute leukemia. The aggressive, fast-moving blood cancer had silently invaded RJ's body, completely compromising his immune system and precipitating his sudden, terrifying physical failure. The delivery of the diagnosis triggered a psychological collapse within Brooke Logan Forrester that was both instantaneous and absolutely devastating. For weeks, Brooke had been operating on a volatile frequency of maternal rage and vindictive fury. She had violently smashed monitors at Logan Creations, officially disowned her own sister Katie in a fit of unforgiving wrath, and unleashed a torrent of bitterness over Hope's secret defection. But in the sterile, unforgiving light of the hospital corridor, all of that fiery, self-righteous anger was instantly extinguished, replaced by a puddle of absolute, paralyzing grief. Brooke fell to her knees, a guttural, soul-tearing sob ripping from her throat as the horrifying reality of her son's mortality crashed down upon her shoulders. Unable to process the sheer, random cruelty of the universe, Brooke's shattered mind desperately scrambled to find a tangible scapegoat for this unimaginable nightmare. Through her blinding tears and hyperventilating sobs, she began to wildly, irrationally blame the toxic environment that had recently engulfed their lives. She pointed a trembling finger at the relentless, vicious corporate war initiated by Katie and Bill Spencer. She screamed that the unbearable stress of the family feud, the heartbreaking betrayal by Hope, and, most specifically, the violent, unhinged physical assault by Will Spencer at the Bikini Bar had systematically broken down RJ's physical defenses. In Brooke's grief-stricken logic, the Spencers were not just corporate rivals. They were the architects of her son's terminal illness. Beside her, Ridge Forrester stood like a crumbling statue, desperately trying to maintain the facade of the stoic, unshakable patriarch. He wrapped his strong, protective arms around his weeping wife, pulling her trembling body into his chest as he whispered hollow promises that everything would somehow be okay. Ridge has spent his entire life fiercely protecting his family, using his immense wealth, influence, and sheer force of will to shield his loved ones from harm. But as he held the shattered remains of his wife in the middle of a clinical hospital corridor, Ridge was forced to confront the most terrifying realization of his life. He was completely and utterly powerless. No amount of Forrester money, no brilliant PR campaign, and no exclusive haute couture design could bribe or intimidate the cancer cells multiplying in his son's blood. However, beneath Ridge's facade of supportive strength, a volcanic inferno of dark, vengeful hatred was violently erupting. The helplessness that paralyzed him in the face of RJ's leukemia rapidly mutated into a blinding, obsessive rage directed entirely at the Spencer family. Ridge's mind flashed back to his recent physical altercation with Bill Spencer, a moment where his anger had boiled over into a physical strike. Now, knowing that his son was fighting a microscopic war for his life, Ridge's hatred for Bill, Katie, and especially Will Spencer reached a terrifying, psychotic crescendo. If he could not physically fight the cancer ravaging RJ's body, Ridge silently vowed that he would channel every ounce of his agonizing grief into utterly annihilating the Spencer family, holding them morally responsible for pushing his son to the brink of death. Meanwhile, in the sterile, isolated confines of the intensive care unit, RJ Forrester slowly drifted back into consciousness. The harsh, unforgiving glare of the fluorescent medical lights pierced his retinas, a stark contrast to the warm, glamorous spotlights of the fashion runways he so deeply loved. The initial fog of confusion slowly lifted, replaced by a creeping, icy dread as he took in the terrifying reality of his surroundings. The rhythmic, mechanical beeping of the heart monitor and the cold plastic of the 4 tubes pumping aggressive fluids into his veins painted a grim picture of his new existence. When the devastating reality of his acute leukemia diagnosis was finally explained to him, the vibrant, ambitious young man felt his entire world violently crumble into dust. The cruel, unforgiving irony of RJ's situation was almost too agonizing to bear. He was a young man standing on the absolute precipice of greatness. He had just solidified his position as a rising star within the Forrester Creations empire, demonstrating a natural, intuitive genius for design that rivaled his legendary grandfather. Furthermore, he had just emerged victorious in a bitter romantic rivalry, successfully winning the unwavering loyalty and affection of Electra Forrester while banishing Will Spencer into the shadows. His future was a blank canvas waiting to be painted with brilliant colors, massive success, and passionate romance. Now, that beautifully crafted future had been violently snatched away, replaced by a grueling, agonizing regimen of chemotherapy, bone marrow biopsies, and a terrifying, uncertain fight for sheer survival. In the wake of this catastrophic medical crisis, the bitter, relentless corporate war between Forrester and Logan Creations suddenly appeared incredibly petty, foolish, and entirely meaningless. The aggressive launch of the Hope by Logan brand, the strategic deployment of the priceless hope for the future diamond, the frantic media frenzy, and the desperate attempts to salvage Eric's haute couture line were instantly rendered utterly insignificant. The fierce battles over intellectual property, brand loyalty, and market dominance that had consumed the adults of Los Angeles were violently overshadowed by the Grim Reaper's looming shadow. Death and disease are the ultimate, terrifying equalizers, completely blind to wealth, legacy, and the names printed on the labels of expensive clothing. The devastating ripple effects of RJ's diagnosis crashed heavily upon Electra Forrester, plunging her into a state of agonizing emotional turmoil. She had just made the definitive, life-altering choice to cast Will Spencer aside, horrified by his violent outburst, and firmly align herself with RJ and the Forrester family. She had chosen RJ as her protector, her partner, and her future. Now, as she sat vigil by his sterile hospital bed, holding his pale, weakening hand, she was forced to watch the vibrant, passionate young man she loved fade against the stark white hospital sheets. The sheer terror of potentially losing the boy she had just chosen threatened to completely consume her, testing the limits of her emotional endurance and forcing her to confront the fragility of human life. Across town, the psychological impact of the news struck Will Spencer with the devastating force of a runaway freight train. Already drowning in a toxic spiral of drunken depression and crushing remorse for accidentally striking Eric Forrester, the revelation of RJ's leukemia diagnosis plunged Will into a living nightmare. A horrifying, agonizing guilt began to consume his every waking thought, torturing him with the terrifying possibility that his physical blows during their brawl had somehow exacerbated RJ's condition or triggered his collapse. The bitter, toxic rivalry that had defined their relationship suddenly transformed into a haunting, inescapable trauma. The petty squabbles over Elektra's affection were replaced by a desperate, agonizing prayer for his rival's survival, proving that beneath the anger, the bonds of their shared history still held a profound, tragic weight. Even the legendary patriarch, Eric Forrester, found himself buckling under the unimaginable weight of this new tragedy. Already nursing a painful black eye from the bar brawl and desperately trying to repair the fractured remnants of his marriage to Donna, Eric now faced the ultimate, unspeakable horror of potentially burying his own grandson. The magnificent legacy he had spent a lifetime fighting so ruthlessly to build and protect suddenly felt like a heavy, hollow burden. As the Forrester family gathered in the sterile hospital waiting room, their petty grievances and corporate ambitions were entirely forgotten. They were no longer fashion moguls, CEOs, or rival designers. They were simply a terrified, broken family, standing united on the front lines of a devastating new war against an enemy that cannot be bought, manipulated, or outdesigned. The true, agonizing test of their strength, resilience, and love had only just begun.